I'm not going to get fired. I'm going to get promoted. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I don't know how, but I'm going to step in, right? I'm going to lean into the fire. I'm going to fight instead of, retreat, right? And so I went into our CEO and our corporate affairs office, our legal team. I said, look, I actually used to run a nonprofit. I know about grants. I worked in campaigns and politics. I know about, the government. I think maybe I work in comms, I think I could be of some help here as we all find our way through the very time-sensitive matter of applying for this grant or applying for these loans, getting to the front of that line and getting as much money as we can, right, for the company to stay alive.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Come with me, if you will, for just a moment to the small shtetl of Anatevka in Tsarist Russia. The year is 1905, and we are in the barn of Tevye, a dairyman. In his reality, he is poor, but in his imagination, he is a rich man. And I'm not going to start singing or yiddle-diddling or diddle-diddling because I don't have the rich baritone of a Topple or a Zero Mustel. I'm sure you've heard the song. But I thought of that song when I read this lesson in a recent podcast guest application. Never forget the independence of your imagination. A perfect explanation of Tevye, yes, and hopefully of you and I as well, after we listen to my next guest. I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Keilholtz, the SVP of Marketing at Broadway Licensing Global. Thanks for joining me, Jeff.
Daniel, thanks so much for having me, man.
All right, let's take a quick look at your background. I want to get into a lot of value, but I want people to know who I'm talking to first. You were a political campaign manager in Maryland and New York before moving into the marketing space where you were director of communications at Carey International. For the past 3 years, Jeff has been at Broadway Licensing Global. Broadway Licensing Global represents 8,000 titles, making it the second largest catalog for live stage plays and musicals worldwide. And Keilholtz managed 4.81 billion media impressions for just one campaign alone this year for one of those titles, a Harry Potter title. So, Jeff, give us a sense. What is your day like as SVP of Marketing?
What is my day like? Great question. I like to get up and hit the ground running, Daniel. And actually, I like to start my day the night before. And what I mean by that is, before I leave my office, I'm a huge fan of sticky notes, and I have actionable to-dos for me to accomplish the morning of, before I open up the albatross of Microsoft Outlook email, right, and go into that vortex, because it helps set my mind up for, all right, we're going to get something done, and we start off in that kind of space, that kind of momentum. So I'll get up, I'll take the train in, the express train into Manhattan. Our office is on Park Avenue. I'm usually one of the first folks in. I like to start the day early. I get in, I start my action items list, feeling pretty good, got a little coffee. Then I start to look at what is going on with my team that day. And as an executive of the company, Daniel, to be honest with you, what I look at, I tend to look at quarterly and annual things that are happening, right? So major campaigns, major projects, major deals. I'm looking at P&L. I'm looking at corporate strategy with our executive team. Then my direct reports, directors, et cetera, senior level folks, they're looking at sort of month to quarter. And then their team is looking at sort of week to month. And that's how we set it up. And so as my team comes in, everyone, is flowing really well, and we just operate in those lanes. And that's typically how the day goes.
Well, I got to ask it too before you get to the office, because I bet a lot of people right now are on the train listening to us. I mean, that's what I've heard. People listen to How I Made It in Marketing. It's more of their downtime. It's not when they're actively at work, like our case study. So anything on the train that you're doing to prepare yourself, or is that like, no, that's me time. I'm away from everyone. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I look, the work will be the work if I'm working on something and it follows me onto the train, and that's what happens, right? In the morning, I tend to like to get into a headspace on my own terms. So I will, read a little bit. I will hit podcasts, things that help me just help my mind wake up, help my, my senses wake up, and that usually helps give me a boost in the morning.
Get the ball rolling. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the lessons from some of the things you've made in your career. As I've said before, it's a great thing about being a marketer. We get to make things. I've never really had any other career. I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary or whatever, but I don't feel like they get to make things, and we do. So your first lesson is win the day. How did you learn this lesson?
So how I how I learned this lesson. It's funny, you said you've never done anything other than marketing, and my background's a bit different, Daniel. I have a sort of an eclectic background. So at a high level, I'll take you through that and then get to how I learned that lesson, right? I started out, I left college and I went to New York to be an actor and study at a conservatory. I was in my early 20s, and I was working in the theater, working in film and TV a bit. But as a working actor, it's very hard to support yourself, quite frankly. The arts aren't subsidized in the States, and you have to find a way to pay the bills, right? And put food on the table. So I put my social consciousness to use, if you will, and that led me into community organizing and then quickly into political campaign management. And I learned on the streets really quickly in high stakes campaigns in Brooklyn and New York, and then over a decade, in Maryland as well, uh, how to operate right in this level of winning the day. And what do I mean by that? I mean election day can't be moved. Okay, you can't get together with a group of stakeholders and align to punt, a go-to-market date, if you will. Election day is there's a flag in the ground, and it's up to you to reach that day on your terms to the best of your ability. And so you have to work backwards from that day. And in campaign management, you are dealing with myriad stakeholders and different roles. So you're building alliances, you're forging partnerships, you're writing policy, you're negotiating deals, you are working on ops, comms, and you are finding folks to execute in those roles. So as a campaign manager, your job isn't necessarily to do any of those roles. Your job is to find the talent to put into those roles and to get those things done. And so winning the day is about pulling everything back to the immediate moment, what you have control over. You don't have control over tomorrow. You don't have control over a week from now. What you have control over is today. What am I going to do today to win this day? And then I do that tomorrow. And if I put enough wins, daily wins back to back, in my experience, Daniel, that is the best possible way, man, to make it probable that me and my team are going to succeed. And that's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, can you give us a specific example, maybe of a recent campaign you worked on how that affects you as a manager, as a leader, what that win the day philosophy does actually on a day-to-day basis? Because obviously, when I hear it, I hear the analogy to what we do. We do campaigns, we have launch dates. I also do want to mention that who's ever listening right now, whatever side of the aisle you're on politically, that was a side that Jeff was a campaign manager for. Okay, I know sometimes when people hear politics, it kind of sees up a little, but that was Jeff's side. He was on your side.
Absolutely.
But yes, I mean, so what does that mean? So I get the entire philosophy. Like, how did that affect a decision you had recently in a specific day for a campaign that you were running? How did you practically use that?
Great. Let's pull it to present day, Daniel. Let's pull it to marketing. Okay. So right now at Broadway Licensing Global, so fast forward, I come through my campaign management. I leaned into comms. I worked as in communications for Carey International, as you said. And from my artistic days, the previous CEO of Broadway Licensing Global called me up at the beginning of the pandemic because I had theater, but I had film and TV background, and everything in the theater industry had shut down, right? And in order to keep the company alive, they wanted to pivot to streaming, but they had no idea what they were doing. So the CEO called me up and said, "Hey man, do you want to help stand this up with me? It's an imprint we're going to call Broadway on Demand." And I said, "Let's go." Of course, I didn't know anything, like I didn't know what I was doing either. I did have limited experience in my background. That said, we forged ahead. It became a 7 day a week slog. And I oversaw original programming, the creation of it. We created 40 different series for Broadway on Demand over a very short period of time. Most of it was not great, right? Uh, one of the series got nominated for an Emmy. That nomination gave our financiers, our board, a lot of encouragement, right, to continue to support what it was we're doing. And then Dramatis Play Service, the biggest legacy play licensing company in the world, was going under. And that put us in a position to acquire DPS and set us up on an M&A roll-up model, right, that fast-tracked our growth from 800 titles that we managed and represented to 8,000 titles today. One of those titles it was like the mouse ate the elephant. We acquired Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. This was the largest acquisition of a Broadway play in the history of the industry, right? It put us on the map at a quantum leap forward. So here we are, this niche firm that is scaling rapidly, still has limited resources, and we're about to go to market with Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. My team was tense. They were panicked. We aligned with the Cursed Child team on our quote unquote election day, right? The day that we were going to announce. Now, could that date be moved? It could, but we were dealing with numerous global partners to make this go to market announcement happen. As you can imagine, this is one of the largest, most prestigious brands, right, in the world. And we had one shot to do this right. So we planted the flag and said, okay, September 5th, I think it was 2023, was the day we were going to announce to the world that we had acquired this show. So we moved backwards, right, as I did in my campaign management, and we of course set milestones. But I was encouraging my team every day to win the day. So, for example, because we had limited financial resources, we said, okay, how do we make a big splash? There's an earned media piece of this. There's a digital campaign piece of this. But one of the things we did was we leaned into stunt marketing. So we created a marketing catalog that was going to drop the day that we announced Harry Potter. And on the cover, we were going to create, I don't know if you know Harry Potter, but it's called a time turner, and it lets them go back and forth in time. We were going to create an augmented reality cover where when you scan that cover, the time turner comes off the cover 3D, spins around, and announces that BLG had acquired Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. This took a ton of work. We had 3 different teams. We had a team in New York, we had a team in LA, and we had a team in China. And so we were constantly working on the iterations of this technology. We had never used this technology before. This was a huge financial investment for us, and it seemed impossible to execute. But when we dialed it back to day to day incremental momentum, it felt easier to wrap your arms around. And that's what we did. The team would get frazzled. The team would get tense and anxious and feel like we weren't going to make it by the deadline. That if we did, the technology was not going to be on par with the Cursed Child brand. But that's when I kept encouraging our team, okay, take a breath, regroup, see the future, come back to the present, and just win each day. And that really helped psychologically, Daniel, the marketing team, not only internally on Park Avenue, but the teams we had globally to all just take a breath and stay focused. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it ties into the next lesson you're talking about too, which is stay nimble, right? So obviously, I think you've just given some great examples of that. But when you use that word, my team, right? So I know you're working with an external team, right? At whatever the play, you've got your team actually in the company, but you also have vendors. And I think in this example of nimbleness, it was an issue actually with one of the vendors. So can you talk us through how that stay nimble philosophy helped you make this decision with a vendor?
Yeah. So stay nimble. It's I practiced martial arts for a long time, and one of the things you learn from, uh, you know, I learned from my time in that practice is it comes from Asian culture. This idea of, if you are too rigid, like a tree branch in the winter, you're gonna snap easily. What you want to try and do is stay nimble and light and malleable, sort of like a sprout in the spring, right? So that way you can roll with the elements, okay? You can withstand the pressure. So staying nimble. We'll stay on the cursed child example here for a minute. We had a PR firm, good people, nice people, but the bottom line was the firm was not delivering the ROI that we needed for us to execute on that September 5th launch date, right? That election day, quote unquote, that we had planted in the ground. So rewind, we're back in April, May of 2023. We're working with this firm. It's, they're telling us what's going on and what's possible and this and that. And trust me, I've been in this game long enough. I know that relationships take time to forge. Trust takes time to build with different outlets, editors, journalists, etc. That said, we still had a date, and we had to have a marquee outlet help us make this announcement, right? That was on brand with the Cursed Child title. And we're getting into late spring, man. And I just felt like we were spinning our wheels, and we were getting spun by the firm. And I had to have a conversation with my internal team, and I said, "Listen, guys, we have to make a call here. Either we stay the course with this current firm that we've worked with before and hope for the best, or we have to make a hard pivot and do it right now to another firm that we haven't worked with before, but may better our odds for success." So I heard my team's input, and there were various opinions, as you can imagine. And then I went to my CEO and I said, "Hey, listen, I distilled this information. This is where we are, and this is what I recommend." And what I recommended was we cut bait and we do it right now. And to his credit, he said, "Go for it." Because I knew we had one shot, Daniel. So we had done our due diligence. We had vetted a few other firms. We found one that we thought was very impressive. We liked their model with how they approached different media outlets, different relationships they had. But it was a gamble, man. Like, you don't know, right? You don't know. But I knew the path we were on. It's like touching a hot stove continuously. I could look my team in the eye to get to September 5th and feel like we blew it, frankly, but we had an opportunity to do something different, right? So on that day, we decided to make a change. We decided to win the day, right? And take control of what we could control. We signed up with this new firm. This firm was phenomenal. They jumped in. It was late in the game. We're here in the summer. This is where we are. And they helped us put together an announcement, an exclusive feature with the Hollywood Reporter that helped us break the news, which was perfectly on par with what we needed. Anyway, man, about the staying nimble piece, right? It's being able to sort of roll with challenges, know things are coming, and not being too rigid in your decision making, right? Removing your ego and being able to have that fluidity. And that in that case, it worked out for us.
Well, give us a sense of what we should look for when we are being pitched by PR agencies, because you've been kind of in that experience with literally this. Probably a lot of people haven't been in this experience. It was the same campaign and one worked and one didn't. So I wonder, what should we look for in some of those pitches? Because so first of all, I will say I'm a fan of PR agencies. As a reporter at Marketing Sherpa,
I am too.
Yeah, and as a host of this, I work with PR agencies every day. I would not be able to do my job with PR agencies, right? Jeff came to me from a PR agency, so I'm a fan of PR agencies. On the flip side, as a brand owner, I've also been pitched by PR agencies as a client. Like, we've had PR agencies, we have events, we have our own publication, we have, MechLabs AI is our parent organization, we have products. So I've been on the pitching end of PR agencies. And I think the challenge in seeing a lot of those pitches is there is a general sameness to them. Like, I could almost predict what is going to happen in the pitch and the RFPs. It's, you show previous things that you've gotten press for. Obviously, you don't show the things you don't. You show some numbers which are tended to be like these. I don't even know where a lot of these numbers come from, because it's just like I've seen before. I forgot the exact numbers, but like getting on Yahoo, and then that's like 1 billion or something like that. When obviously it's a press release buried somewhere in Yahoo. There's no way there's 1 billion eyeballs on that, And so again, there's a certain pattern you see in some of these, and you have pictures of the people that are working there, are going to be dedicated to you, and these relationships we have, and then what we're going to do, which is generally the same thing, is going to be putting out press releases or coming up with a study or whatever. So that's a challenge I definitely always have, is kind of parsing, like, okay, well, this is, and this is what we all need to do as vendors all do. They set their pitch, but like, what can we actually look for in those presentations that might signify success or not? Because a lot of times, this is what I say in life, we teach a lot of A/B testing here. And there's I love A/B testing, because you can put, let's say, one headline, another headline, you can know this headline works better than that. Mostly when we make a decision to choose a vendor, we don't have that A/B test. We don't say like, well, because we don't, like, maybe this one didn't work out. Would that one have worked out? Or maybe this one did work out, but would that one have worked out better? We don't know. We had the 3 or the 5. We picked the one. We know what happened. We don't know what didn't happen. But you, my friend, you were in that unique platform. You had 2 PR agencies for the same campaign and 2 different outcomes. So give us a sense, what should we look for in some of those pitches when we're getting pitched by the different vendors, RFPs, whatever you want to call them, that might signify it will work or it won't?
It's a fabulous question. It's an important question, especially in marketing leadership. I want to say as well, I'm a huge fan of PR firms. I'm a major believer in earned media, in the value of earned media. That is a huge part of our larger strategy at BLG. And frankly, that's what's helped us dominate in share of voice over the last couple of years against our major competitors with much, more robust resources. All that said, from the chair I'm sitting in, Daniel, I would take every pitch deck with a grain of salt. Like you said, a lot of them are predictable. You know that they're going to have flashy headlines. They'll have some infographics for you. A lot of it's going to be vague. We can do everything for everyone in any way you want, etc. Practicality. I'm a practical guy. I like pragmatism. I like coming back to, okay, all right, just take away the spin, take away the hype, take away the glitz. has anyone that I know that I respect worked with this firm before? Right? Referrals are a huge thing for me, right? I would like to hear someone tell me this firm did this for me in this way and helped us solve this challenge, right? That helps give me a lot more confidence than a blind pitch. So I would always say if you can uh, uh, find a sort of first person referral, that's the best thing. If not, ask for references and follow up on those references. It's a telltale sign to me, in my experience, when I've asked for references before from PR firms or other vendors, right? And they'll say, well, look at our website. Well, I did, and I'd like to talk to them. And then there's, a bunch of hemming and hawing, and you're like, oh, okay, this is a big red flag for me. So the first person referrals, absolutely start there. If not, ask for those references and follow up with those references. And, the pitch deck's going to be the pitch deck. The other thing is what I liked about the firm that we're using now, and frankly, I'll call them out because they're fantastic. It's interdependence PR. I like their model, man. Their model is different than the other models I've seen in PR. Part of their secret sauce is that they use an AI powered sort of model that helps identify outlets and reporters and editors and journalists, right, who may want to write about the story we're trying to pitch and who hasn't yet, and then can also see, oh, if this outlet with this writer wrote about this story, it is likely to generate this amount of impressions or views or clicks, right? So you're helping that outlet do its homework and say, listen, if you write about this story with this team, in this way, there's a huge probability something good is going to happen. And I can tell you from our experience, it works, right? And so I like their model. Their model's a little bit different. The other is they have a real team. Listen, man, every company is different. You have startups, you have mid-market, you have large corporations. Not There isn't a one-size-fits-all package. Some firms don't need a huge team. Some have to have a huge PR team. The team that we had, which was perfect for us, we had 4 different reps, right, which was a team for us. And each one of them was in the continental United States and in a different time zone. So we had essentially a team working in real time every working day. And it really helped with the efficiency, especially, bro, because we were so time limited with what we had to accomplish. So those were some things that really stuck out to us. And listen, then there's also the democratization of PR. And there are other firms out there that can really help companies leverage, PR without too many middlemen, if you will. So those are some things that I like about PR and that have just worked for me and my team, especially BLG.
I think that's helpful when we're all looking at vendors. I think one thing I like you said about is talking to that specific individual reference of someone who worked with them, because the thing that, like, one thing PR agencies do, I mean, marketers and advertisers do it too, right? All the good news, man, all the good news. And we know just from listening to this very conversation with Jeff, and if you've ever heard How I Made It Marketing before, like, a campaign never unravels that way. There's going to be good and bad. And so when you're talking to someone, what I would advise too is not, did everything go flawlessly, because that is, boy, 1 in a million. But like, okay, when something went wrong, because it went wrong, how did they handle it, right? And that's at the end of the day what you want to know, because you're going into the battle under fire with them, which ties into your next lesson very nicely. So you talked about a lot of the kind of machinations of what goes on behind a campaign, but also you individually as the marketing leader, all eyes on you, man. And you said, stay cool under pressure. So how did you learn this lesson? How did you learn to do this?
I hate to, repeat myself, but I'll be honest, a lot of it goes back to my campaign management days. When you were raising money, when you were, forging alliances, you are with disparate groups and personalities and points of view. Everyone has an opinion, right? And everyone is always Monday morning quarterbacking you, especially when you're in the hot seat. right? If you're managing a political campaign, if you are running marketing for a firm, if you are an executive position, if you're any sort of leadership position, you never know what someone else is thinking. But a lot of times, a lot of folks are probably second guessing what it is you're doing or thinking, oh, I could do it better, or this or that, the other thing. And you have to be able, one, to tolerate that, and staying cool under pressure. All eyes are on you at the end of the day, like you said, right? In leadership, especially in marketing leadership, you have numerous different team members executing countless different tactics, all after uh, a singular goal, right? So whether it's the a go to market campaign or what have you, but being able to stay cool under pressure, like you said, because things are going to fall apart. Something is going to happen that you didn't anticipate, that you wish didn't happen, that maybe you didn't prepare for as best as you could have. And you have to figure out a way to exercise that clutch mentality and say, okay, when the pressure's on, how do I slow my heart rate down? How do I remember to breathe, right? Because your energy is contagious in leadership. Okay. If you're panicked, your team's going to be panicked. And what you want to do, in my opinion, is instill as much confidence as you can at all times in your team members to execute at their very best. Now, does that mean lying to them? No, right? Of course not. Does that mean uh, uh, spinning them? Right? Like everything's fine when it's not. No, I actually, it's the opposite. I like to acknowledge, again, pragmatism. I like to acknowledge if we're in a ditch, I say, all right, team, here we are in a ditch, elephant in the room. This is where we are. Okay, now accepting that, what can we do incrementally to win each day to drive us out of this ditch as quickly and as efficiently as possible? So that goes back to my, like I said, my um, political days. Clearly now as an executive at BLG, with the rate we're growing, we have a lot of eyes on us, and so um, last thing I'll say is I love the sport of tennis, and I love it because to me it's chess on your feet at 120 miles an hour. And typically, what you're seeing in a tennis match is you're seeing two existential crises in real time, like one person on this side of the net, and person on the other. And in most cases, like, first of all, they can't talk to each other, they can't touch each other, they're not going up and sitting with their team, they don't have or their coach. It's them problem solving in real time. And that never gets old to me. And I love seeing the likes of Andre Agassi or Rafael Nadal and the way that they've been able to exercise that muscle and then unleash it, the idea of clutch mentality when the pressure's on.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. So, can you think of maybe any specific examples where you had to make a snap judgment and stay cool under pressure? Right. Because, for example, I interviewed Marco Mueller, the CMO of Aviva, and How I Made It Marketing. One of his lessons was you can make a big career and still stay human. And he told the story of when he led Russia and the CIS countries for SAP, when the CMO of all of SAP came in, just happened to be a day, they had all these appointments all over Moscow. There was some big public event going on, horrible traffic. They couldn't get a helicopter because I guess at that time it was reserved for the Russian elite. And the CMO put him on the spot and said, Marco, what are we going to do? And he said, well, we can go in the subway, which he said was not a great day. No air conditioning, security issues. But the guy, went around with them all day in the subway. And what Marco was thinking is like, man, I'm done after this. I'm fired. And the CMO, praised him for being cool under pressure, thinking on his feet and finding a solution. So when you talk about tennis, you got me thinking and staying cool under pressure. Like marketing is a very deadline driven environment. I think we've all had those leaders too, who would just freak out under, right? You're always under fire, freak out, like, we got to get this thing done. Me too. Like, always hate that mentality. And when you mentioned tennis, it got me thinking of, I am not as big of a tennis fan. I remember, I think it was Pat McEnroe. Was that the guy that always do like through temper tantrums and stuff like that? I don't remember, like in the 80s.
John McEnroe.
John McEnroe. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking in my head, is like, we've all had the marketing like John McEnroe. He's getting like throwing things around. I mean, I worked in agencies. There's been holes in walls. There's been temper tantrums. There's been all sorts of things, right? We've all been there. So I like this philosophy. But you mentioned before that PR agency change, big change. But again, still, that's more of a slow moving crisis. Sometimes it is that snap judgment. It is in the moment. There's a tennis ball heading at your head at 120 miles an hour. So can you take us into one of those decisions where you had to make a snap judgment?
Yeah. So staying with the tennis metaphor for a second, Andre Agassi, I think it was 2005 U.S. Open quarterfinal. Was it going to be his last year? I'm sure all this is going through his head in the moment as he is in his fifth set. He had this I think, 2-set comeback. He's against James Blake, and he's, I think, 15-40 down in the tiebreak. And essentially, he's 3 points from his entire career being over. And he gets a look at a second serve. And instead of just like bunting it back, right, what does he do? He steps into the court and smashes a cross court forehand for a winner. And I'm like, God damn, like that is living to the fullest. You know what I mean? Like, he took control of the moment and said, I'm just gonna whip this forehand cross court. I'm gonna step into the court when the pressure's on. So, as you were talking, Daniel, the example that comes to mind, we have plenty of those at BLG in politics, but I'm going to pivot to when I was at Carey International during COVID. Okay. I was running comms and marketing partnerships for the company. I was not in a senior leadership position. I was sort of in a middle management position. But Carey International is the oldest and most prestigious executive transportation firm around the world, right? And you're talking about executive transportation, and COVID hits, right? Business just stopped. And I mean stopped. And everyone was freaking out, like every other, person and company around the globe. And one of the things we had to do and figure out immediately, even just to stay alive, was the small business office in the federal government, the SBO. They were giving out these paycheck protection loans, the PPP loans for businesses in order to cover payroll, operational expenses to stay afloat. And it was imperative that Carey got one of these loans in order for us to stay alive. And of course, I'm thinking about the business, but I'm thinking about my wife, and my daughter. And I said to my wife, like, when this happened, I said, I'm not going to get fired. I'm going to get promoted. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I don't know how, but I'm going to step in, right? I'm going to lean into the fire. I'm going to fight instead of, retreat, right? And so I went into our CEO and our corporate affairs office, our legal team, and I said, look, I actually used to run a nonprofit. I know about grants. I worked in campaigns and politics. I know about, the government. I think maybe and I work in comms. Hello. Like, I think I could be of some help here as we all find our way through the very time sensitive matter of applying for this grant or applying for these loans, getting to the front of that line and getting as much money as we can, right, for the company to stay alive. So I ended up working. It was day in, day out with our legal team and me working with the federal government to make this happen. And we ended up, through our work, achieving in obtaining one of the largest loans of its kind in the global transportation industry. And it kept the company afloat, man. Like, it kept it alive. This 100-year company kept alive. And frankly, to their credit, I think that's the reason they kept me on board, because unfortunately they had to lay off a lot of other folks during that time. Now they've come back, but I was running marketing and comms in their RFP process, and they kept me on board, of course, to help manage this. But and I essentially was becoming part of that leadership circle. At the same time, that's when Broadway Licensing Global called me to help stand up BOD, and I was kind of doing these things simultaneously because I didn't know which one was going to work, if either of them were going to work. But I was thinking about my wife and my daughter, right? And I was just leaning into the fire. So yeah, that experience during COVID, talk about staying cool under pressure, man. That was that was a big one.
Well, it's such a nice reminder for everyone. I mean, I know we've all heard that saying that the Chinese character for crisis and opportunity are the same. I actually think that's not true. I'm not 100% sure, but it is a great lesson, right? But for what people are going through right now, a lot of people listening on this call, whether you're writers, marketers, whatever it is that rise of AI, right? And so Jeff was thinking, hey, is COVID going to take my job? Is AI going to take my job? Or is that an opportunity to use everything you've learned in your career and turn it into a tool or something like that? So in just a moment, we talked about some of the lessons we learned from some of the things Jeff has made. In just a moment, we're going to talk about some of the lessons we learned from some of the people he made them with. That's a great thing we get to do as marketers. We get to build things. We get to build them with people. But first, I should mention, tying into that AI lesson, that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is in fact underwritten by MechLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. And you can get a 3-month free scholarship to the AI Guild and get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry. Get your scholarship at join.mechlabsai.com. That's join.meclabsai.com, courtesy of MechLabs AI, and maybe get some ideas on how to make the most of this opportunity and not have it be a crisis. So let's talk about some of the lessons you learned from some of the people you made a lot of things with. The first person you mentioned was Sergey Dryden. And the lesson you said you learned was never forget the independence of your imagination. That sounds, I mean, that's where like your acting and play background comes from. I guess that's something he said. That's just beautiful, like how it's worded. Can you take us into that story?
Yeah, man, it is beautiful, right? I'm happy to. So when I was in my early 20s, I was in New York. I was acting. I just left the Actors Conservatory where I was studying, and I always wanted that Mr. Miyagi, right? I always wanted that 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 teacher, that sensei to, you know, really help, guide me in a very personalized way. And I was needing that. Um, and it's 2003. There's a blizzard in New York. Um, I end up going to the Lincoln Center Theater and seeing a movie. This movie theater happened to be open during the snowstorm, and it was this film called Russian Ark. Uh, it was in Russian, English subtitles. And the thing about Russian Ark is I can't imagine the running time. I think escapes me. I think it's like 98 minutes, but it's one shot, one take, Daniel, right? And the actor in this film, his name was Sergei Dryden, as you mentioned, and it was one of the most astonishing performances I'd ever seen. How did I learn about this film? Well, as a struggling actor, I was working at a hotel serving breakfast, right, to international business clients, and I would read the New York Times every day and see the ads. I'm like, there was this great ad for Russian Ark. Man, let me go see this. And it blew my brain apart. I was like, oh my God, this this actor was so sensitive and so impactful, uh, and I didn't understand a word he was saying. Right? It's all subtitled. And so I spent the next 3 days trying to track down Sergey in Russia. Now I don't speak Russian, and he doesn't speak English. I come to find out, but I got in touch with him. I ended up, fast forward, forging a mentorship with a mentor mentee relationship with him. He's with the Moscow Art Theater. I'm in New York. He had a friend who spoke Russian and English and lived in New Jersey. She and I would meet. I started to learn Russian from her at that one point, but we were corresponding with letters. Like I would write him in English and she would translate it into Russian and vice versa. And one of the correspondences that he sent to me during that time, Daniel, was as an actor about never forgetting the independence of your imagination. And the thing how that came about was I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and I was very self-critical. Too self-critical. It's important to be self-critical, right? But you don't want the pendulum to swing too hard to one side. And the too much self criticism was locking me up. Right? I was getting into my head as an actor, and he was trying to, I think, awaken or reawaken in me the notion that there's only one of me, and my sensitivities are unique to me, and my expression is unique to me, and my experiences are also unique to me. And if I can put all that together um, and allow that to come out naturally, um, it can make for some beautiful art. And that lesson has always stuck with me to remind myself when I get into my head and start being too overly self-critical, like not to beat myself up so hard, right? That there's always a way, that you have value, that you have a perspective that is important. And so those things have helped me a lot, personally and professionally.
I want to key in on that word independence too, though. So we as marketers tend to travel in packs, right? One of those packs, everything's digital, or as I mentioned, AI. You mentioned you first discovered this by seeing a print ad in the New York Times. I know this was a while ago, but what role does print, New York Times, whatever traditional marketing play in what you're doing right now? Because, for example, when we've done research and we asked a representative sample of Americans, what media they trust most when they're going to make a purchase decision, right? So this isn't just like where do they find things or whatever, but when you're going to make a purchase decision, what do you trust most? And the crazy thing is, I mean, we thought we were going to show things are moving more in the digital direction. Now, this was a few years ago, it was like 2017, 2018, but the top 6 media were all traditional. The bottom 6 were all digital. And the number one media, 82% said print ads in a newspaper or magazine. And it would make sense. So I know print has these challenges, right? We can't track and all of these things that we'd like to do. We can't attribute as much. That's, I think sometimes why we don't use it, because we want to attribute and say it came from there. But there's that trust factor that, digital has a challenge with. Also, when I think about your industry, it's funny because when you said that, just a light bulb went off for me when you said you discovered that film looking at an ad in New York Times. When I think of every play, or maybe the more artsy films that I have discovered, it has been often a print ad in the New York Times or another newspaper. So for your industry too, it seems like, I know that's not what you're selling itself, the play to get a ticket on Broadway. It does seem that is an industry that leads into, that medium. So I just wonder for you, or you could tell me I'm totally wrong, this didn't work. Like, have you that independence of your thought? Have you gone along with what other marketers are doing for other brands because they're going to digital or mobile or whatever? Or has there been some independence there where you said, hey, for our brand, some of these more traditional tactics might make more sense for our ideal customer?
It's a fabulous question. Yeah, I will say we do not spend a lot of our budget in print. It's very minimal. Part of that reason is, like you said, our job at BLG is not to sell a Broadway ticket per se. Our job is what we do is acquire the Broadway player musical and represent that asset and want other theaters around the globe to produce it on their stages, right? So we are maximizing the value of that IP outside of Broadway or outside of the West End, right? Now, sometimes we'll work with producers on a revival of things, et cetera, but primarily that's the business we're in, is the licensing of those assets. So yes, there's a lot of, in digital, et cetera. And of course we use those tactics. I will say, man, in terms of independence, we lean heavy into earned media. We lean heavier into PR and earned media than any of our major competitors. Why do we do that? Well, what we've found is that when used cleverly and correctly, for every dollar used in PR and earned media, the long tail value of that far outweighs just sort of classic digital media, if you will. Evergreen features. We want to not only, we're in a position where we've had to build the visibility of our fast growing brand, right? To earn trust in the theater ecosystem outside of New York, right? But we also have thousands of titles that we have to represent. Not all of those titles are Harry Potter, right? A lot of them need a lot of TLC, right? So you're educating the theater going public. You're educating artistic directors. You're educating the underwriters of theaters to help them understand the value of these plays and musicals and why they should produce these shows on their stage and not others. So we are promoting these playwrights. We're promoting certain titles, and we really believe one of our big KPIs is SOV, is share of voice, right? So we're constantly looking at, you know, how are we dominating the media, published media, articles and that space, because we feel like it gives us, like I said, it's a longer tail value for us, and we have seen the strong correlation of as we've hit the gas on pushing forward aggressively with PR and earned media, traffic to our site have has increased, conversions have increased, active interest from different producers and artistic directors has increased, and so yeah. So in terms of independence, right? That's one way we work independently, in a way that some of our competitors don't tend to.
Yeah, I remember some event and someone, the marketer asked me, hey, should I be on Facebook? Should I be doing Facebook promotion? I was like, well, what do you do? Or whatever. And he was like a middleman. He's like, well, I buy from that guy and sell to that guy. I'm like, well, that guy's over there and that guy's over there. So maybe just because everyone else is on Facebook, maybe you shouldn't invest in Facebook, right? But so all these ideas, they're great in theory. Nothing matters unless they get done. You've talked about some of the difficulty of getting things done, and I appreciate that. I think everyone listening will appreciate that because they know these ideas sound great in theory, but unless they happen. And that's one of the things I really try to get out there with How I Made It marketing, not just buzzwords. Yeah, it sounds good. How'd you do it? And you learned that lesson back to your political career from Chris Owens, and he said execution sets people apart. So how'd you learn this from Chris?
Yeah, so Chris was the son of Major Owens, who was a congressional icon, and Chris is a political expert, right? And when I started to work on my first congressional race, I was the community outreach manager, so I did a lot of that partnership building, comms, etc. But then quickly, I became the deputy campaign manager, and then ultimately the campaign manager of this congressional race. And this race was so big at the time. I'm giving you a little context here because this was, I think this is important to set the scene. We were going to hire the election day operator, the architect of that election day plan, who worked on Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign back in the 80s. And of course, then we didn't have the money and he bailed. And so, little old Jeff is here having to figure out how to put together an election day operation for this huge congressional race. And I had no business whatsoever being in charge of something like that. And it was Chris who was, at that time, I guess, he was my Miyagi, my Mr. Miyagi, right? He was our chief advisor. And I remember he sat me down and unfolded, when we first unfolded this huge map of the congressional district. And you saw block by block, zip code by zip code, the entire geography of the district. And let me tell you, this one congressional district was so large, it had more people that resided in it than the entire state of Wyoming. Okay, so this was a huge deal early on in my political life. And Chris said, Jeff, because I was getting into my head, right? I was too rigid. I was that branch in the winter. I was starting to snap, and I was like, you know what? I didn't go to Yale and study poli sci. I didn't do this. And he said, no one gives a shit. He said, you are now in this position. All these other people have fallen off and you've leaned into the fire. You're here because there's something in you that can operate. There's something in you that can develop a campaign, that can drive forward, right? That can forge alliances. He said, no one cares where you went to school once you are in the driver's seat, right? If you're there and executing, that's all people care about. And frankly, Daniel, fast forward to now, um, going from the streets in political campaign management in New York to now, being an executive on Park Avenue, I tell you, man, a lot of the lessons are the same. Is if you can deliver and you're not an asshole, like that's a good recipe. If you can execute and keep your head and have a smile on your face and stay nimble and win the day and empower those around you and remove your ego, you're going to put yourself in the best position possible for success.
Well, and part of that being someone people like to work with, let's say it that way, is the ability to form partnerships. So you talked a lot about, you managing your team or working with vendors, but do you have any examples of forming a partnership in an organization? Because that's often is what it takes to execute. So for example, when I interviewed Michelle Huff, the chief marketing officer of user testing, one of her lessons was become a true partner with your sales counterpart. And she told the story of how they look at it as a sales plus marketing budget. And, they go to market together. And that's how she's able to execute with that true partnership. So you talk about coming to these organizations, yes, managing your team, doing these other things. If you really want to get it done, a lot of times there's a peer or even someone senior to you that you have to partner with. Have you ever been able to do that within an organization? Have any examples of that could help us?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, staying on that track, in our business at BLG, the vast majority of the revenue that we drive is what we call non-touch. And what's that mean? Well, we have 3 different customer demos that we go after. We go after professional theaters, we go after non-professional theaters, and we go after schools. Those 3 demos have very diverse personas, but we all want them to license our shows. We want them to license and produce our shows versus other shows, right? And the non-touch piece is 2 out of 3 of those lanes, the schools and the non-professional, are non-touch. They usually are alerted to our shows, educated about our shows, excited about our shows through marketing tactics, through marketing campaigns, which bring them into the site. They'll apply, and it's like retail, right? It's non-touch. They'll be able to get their application through and approved, and we collect the revenue. We pass it through to because we represent the creatives, and that's how it works. On the other hand, there's the professional theaters. There are far fewer professional theaters out there, but as you can imagine, even though there are far fewer theaters, which means far fewer productions, each of those productions tends to generate a lot more money than a non-professional or school theater. Okay? That's much more the professional, much more white glove, high touch, right? And our licensing sales team is responsible for forging those relationships directly and converting those theaters to license our shows. The one thing about me at BLG is I've sort of been the triage surgeon in the executive team, whereas we've hired people to just run licensing or run acquisitions or run this or that. I've been that executive leader who has, over the course of my tenure, as we've scaled rapidly, paratrooped into different divisions in the company and helped to stabilize them. So I started a BOD, then I joined the executive team. We bought DPS, we bought stage rights, we started to roll up these other companies. I went into the licensing, sales, and business development division and stabilized that, helped grow that by 59% during COVID. I went back to BOD. Then I told our CEO, where our big gap is right now? It's in marketing and comms and in PR. Let me run that. And that's what I'm doing now. But all that I learned from my time in politics of being able to sort of touch every piece, right, of an organization. So fast forward, here we're at BLG. I'm in charge, quote unquote, of marketing and comms and PR right now. but our licensing and sales team, there is a ton of overlap, man. And if we do not work together, it is not going to go well. And one of the things that we've learned actually this year is that we weren't partnering together enough. We started to silo off a bit. Marketing was, we were starting to, because we were about driving revenue, and most of our revenue was coming from non-pro. So we said, all right, we're going to focus in on what we're doing, and licensing was going to do what it was doing. But then we realized, that's not a winning strategy here. We have to take more time to work cross-departmentally, work more collaboratively on campaigns, work further out on different go-to-market strategies collaboratively, right? And so we started to put dedicated time on the books between our teams in a cadence. And that really started to help us forge ahead more efficiently and effectively, and we're building trust. Now that sounds easy, right? It sounds obvious, like, oh yeah, you should work together. But man, when you're in it, sometimes everyone's human. You can't see the forest for the trees. You're focused on the end result, and the horse blinders are on, right? They're on a little too tight. And so we said, okay, we got to take this off and collaborate and a little bit more. And frankly, a lot of our most creative ideas have come out of that. Right? I'm a big believer in that. There's no bad idea in a brainstorm, and no one has a monopoly on good ideas. And these, good ideas, the best idea can come from anywhere, right? And yeah, there's a balance between having too many cooks in the kitchen and having collaboration. But at the end of the day, it's essential for our team and our company where it is now to continue to be collaborative between marketing and licensing for us to drive forward and grow at the rate we want to grow.
So this next lesson, we were going to have it earlier in the program, but I moved it towards the end because I realized this is probably pretty much the core lesson, because I heard you talk so many times about how maybe I wasn't the best guy, but I just leaned in, or there was this tough situation. I just leaned in. I just went for it, And the lesson is endurance is essential. And it seems like that is kind of the capstone of your career so far, is just sticking to it, even if you felt like maybe, you didn't have the exact training for it or whatever it was. You said you learned this from Andy Goldsworthy. So tell us first who Andy is for people who don't know, and then, tell us how you learned this lesson.
Yeah. So Andy is, he's the subject of a documentary film about his life and work called Rivers and Tides. Andy is a Scottish environmental artist. He works only with natural elements. Okay, so he's sort of a sculptor with the likes of ice and twigs and dirt and mud and bark, and that's his medium. His medium is the earth. And I was like this Sergey situation, searching for a Miyagi. I saw Rivers and Tides in a downtown theater in New York, and it just blew my mind. And a lot of the things he was doing as a visual artist, as an environmental artist, I felt like paralleled with what I was trying to learn and accomplish as a dramatic artist, as an actor. And I do believe that acting is an endurance art. But we can talk more about that later. That said, I reached out to one of the galleries that represents Andy in New York. I said, I would love to come and just shadow him. I would love to carry a pail for him. I would love to volunteer, right? I just want to help. I would like to be in that space, in the space with a master like that, to see what I could glean. And they bit. They said, sure. And I worked with Andy twice. The one I'll talk about here, he was at Gallery Lalong down in Tribeca, I think, in New York. He was doing an exhibition called White Walls. And he came in. I met him. He had a very small team. I was intimidated, but he was a very sweet guy, and put me at ease right away. And I ended up, man, working with Andy day in, day out, side by side, like we were covered in clay and natural elements and up in these lifts, and he's putting the stuff up on these walls, and and so what would happen is he put made these walls out of it was like a natural clay, and you would see over the course of the exhibition, every day you would come in, it would change, right? It would, because it would fracture here or would dry here, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, when you're working with natural elements, things never go as planned. You are focused, you have an idea of what it is you're trying to accomplish, you are working your fingers to the bone, and maybe the sun comes up earlier than you thought and the ice is melting, or maybe the wind blows and it blows part of a sculpture apart. Or with white walls, he didn't use natural hair in the clay to help it sort of coalesce and bind together, and the white walls actually started to come apart quicker in the exhibition than any of us had anticipated. And I started to freak out when the gallery opened the exhibition, and so did some of his team. But Andy was like, "No, this is great." I'm like, "What? Like, what do you mean it's great?" And he's like, "No, this is part of the experience of just putting yourself out there, and you keep going. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And but life is a journey, man. And the only thing I know for sure, Daniel, is to hang in there and to keep going, right? And we have to think of life, in my opinion, as an endurance art, right? We are constantly trying to win the day for ourselves in our job, personally, for our families. We're using the natural elements we have, our brains, our talent, physical strength, our sensitivities, our relationships. Sometimes those things work out, right? You're able to pivot from a PR firm to another PR firm and it works. Sometimes a relationship uh, burns apart and it scars you. But err on the side of momentum, err on the side of leaning forward, whether you're going through something personal, professional, especially in marketing, man. Yeah, we have KPIs that we use to measure our success, if you will. We have campaign ideas, we have tactics we're employing, we have this, that, and the other thing. Nothing's ever going to go perfectly. I think the idea is to surround yourself with good people. People, don't be afraid to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who are maybe more talented than you. Again, think of it as a campaign manager, especially as a senior leader in marketing. You don't have to be an expert at every element of marketing. What you have to be an expert in is surrounding yourself and pulling together a team who can execute expertly in all those domains and put them in the best position possible to execute at the highest level and be the best versions of themselves they can be. And that takes endurance, because people are, again, your team is always going to be looking at you, Daniel, for how they should be feeling, what they should be thinking, and what to do next. So just dial it back to winning the day, and you just keep moving forward. And I think winning the day, man, is one of the best exercises we can take on for ourselves to build that muscle of endurance.
You're talking about winning the day. I love that. What if we want to win our career too, right? So big picture, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer? We talked about a lot of different things. I like the endurance part. We talked about a lot of different things from all of your stories, but if you just had to break it down, you're talking directly to our listeners right now. What would you say? What are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Broad perspective. I'm not necessarily looking for a degree in marketing. I want people who can think broadly, right? And what do I mean by that? To put themselves in the shoes of the people we're trying to reach, right? So that takes a psychological, sociological, even an anthropological sort of approach. It takes a sensitivity, right? What pain points are we trying to solve for these people in real ways? And then dial it back to how do we communicate that? So that sort of broad perspective, that sort of sensitivity, I definitely want, I'm looking for people who are autonomous, self-motivated. I'm not a micromanager. I don't believe in micromanagement. I don't work well when I'm micromanaged. I wouldn't say I'm a hands-off leader, but I like to hire the best and put them in a position to drive. But just don't take advantage of that, right? So I'm looking for those types of qualities in folks. I'm looking for people who are collaborative and not precious about their ideas and their point of view, because that type of mentality, those types of attitudes, in my experience, only put sand into the gears, and it actually helps, I think, drive a negative culture. So I'm looking for people who are collaborative, not precious, have a broad perspective, have sensitivities, who are proactive, right? Who are willing to pick up a ball and drive forward. Um, and at the end of the day, man, life's too short to work with just negative people, right? I like to work with good people. I like to just work good energy people, right? That to me, I feel like is a recipe for success with the team.
Well, thanks for letting us dive through your entire career, pick your brain, and hear all your lessons. It was really enjoyable. Thanks for this, Jeff.
Daniel, man, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And your pod is really inspiring, man. You do a lot of good for a lot of people. So I really appreciate it. And I hope to keep going.
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you very much. And thanks to you all for listening. Hopefully we are helping you out. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.